All right, family, I want to welcome you to the Do Work Podcast. The Do Work Podcast is a weekly podcast where we discuss all things mindset, motivation, entrepreneurship, free thinking, and how to live your best life possible. Today is no different. I have an amazing guest today with an amazing story, and I cannot wait to bring her in. Guys, let me introduce you to my good friend, Tiffany Yarina. Tiffany, what is up?
Hey, what is up? Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, man. Of course. So the cool thing about Tiffany is this. I was looking for guests, and I told you guys that season 3 was going to be riveting, and I wanted insane, crazy stories. And yeah, this girl has one. So we've been following each other for a while, and I loosely knew a little bit about your story, Tiffany. But one, you are a veteran. You are a veteran. You did serve our country, and you know I'm pro America. So thank you. I do appreciate you serving our country because it is nothing to be taken lightly. And the second thing is you battled cancer. So let's back up. Let's talk about how you got into the military. What prompted you to do it? Because there was a point in my life where I wanted to get in. My godfather is like high-ranking Navy official. And when I wanted to get in, he told me no. He literally was like, don't do it. And I was like, what? He was like, I don't want you in. Don't do it. So I never went into the military. I trusted his judgment. I trusted his words. Still wish I would have went in and served the country, but here we are. So please tell me, how did you get, what made you prompt to join the military, and what branch did you join?
Sure. So I have an uncle. My grandfather and my uncle were both in the Marines. And my uncle right now, I'm not going to say his name, but it took him to the CIA, and that's where he works right now. So I had that life. Funny story you didn't even know about me is I was like the biggest professional wrestling fan in the world.
Shut up.
And I actually, I went to professional wrestling school. I did that.
When I wanted to do
that. That's crazy. I was supposed to marry the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels, everybody. That was my life. That was what was in my head. But I did. I went to professional wrestling school. It was in Hazleton, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
I had just graduated high school. I was entering my first year of college. I walked up. They used to be the tag team champions, the Head Shrinkers. And so they were related to Jimmy Superfly Snuka, Dwayne Johnson, etc. So anyway, I walked in there. I found out about it. I walked up to them and I said, I want to wrestle. They were like, I am 5'2". I lost an inch even in my 40s here. But she looked at me, the wife, and she's like, you're a peanut. And I said, I want to wrestle because I was weightlifting and everything since I was 13. So, I mean, I got in the old WWF ring. I was actually going against Billy Kidman was there from WCW. Yeah. It was interesting. And of course it cost money though. So when I came home and told my dad, he got really upset and he's like, you're not doing that. You need to go to college, whatever. And I'm the type of person who needs a challenge. I get bored. And I knew about with my grandfather and my uncle. And I was also reading at the time, Every Man a Tiger by Tom Clancy. And it's about the Desert Storm Air Campaign and General Norman Schwarzkopf, who I do respect a lot, him and Colin Powell. And so I went to, and a friend of mine from college was actually in the Pennsylvania National Guard. He was a Cav Scout. Okay. And so between him, the book I was reading, my family, I went to the air show that was in Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, which is where I'm from, everybody. I live in Jersey, though. But I went to the air show, met with a recruiter for the Pennsylvania Army National Guard, talked about it, and I was like, you know something? They're going to help pay for college. It's a challenge, and I'm going to do it. And I never second-guess myself, and I just go for stuff. And that's what I did. I enlisted. And then I had to pick my MOS, which is the job. It's the military occupational specialty. Right. My father almost fell over. And I was like, but it's not costing you anything. I graduated high school in 99. So I enlisted in 2000. I ended up taking a semester off of school to do basic training and then go straight through to AIT. So I did basic in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. I did AIT in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And I left in February of 2001.
Okay.
And I came back in July of 2001. Then I started drilling again with my unit. And then unfortunately, I was back in school, and that's when 9/11 happened. And it completely flipped the military world as we knew it upside down.
So what, I'm curious. So you enlisted prior to 9/11.
I did.
Now, did you really think, and I like to ask you this, did you honestly think you were going to be called to go into battle when you enlisted?
No, not with the National Guard, especially because obviously, I mean, we know recruiters can really pump stuff up, but the basis of the National Guard was, as far as I was concerned and knew at that time, was to stay stateside. So if anything did happen, natural disasters, anything in the United States, like, we were to stay stateside and help that way, whether it's in Pennsylvania or go to a different state.
Okay.
And the last war that we had that I was around for was Desert Storm. So nobody thought, I didn't ever think that I was going to end up being faced with combat. And actually, my goal eventually after college was to become a drill sergeant.
So let me ask you this. So you get the call. Do you feel you're ready? Like, were you ready? Because I'm gonna be honest, I'm a big fan of military. Like, all my uncles were in the Navy. Tons of my uncles were in the Navy and in the Army. Two of my uncles were in Nam. So I come from a military family. You know what I mean? So it wouldn't have been nothing for me to serve or be a police officer. Like, that was quite normal. Yeah. But I think the real shit with that is when people join, I don't know if they really think, like, I'm ready to die for my country.
Yeah,
when you sign that, like, you're literally saying, regardless of what you believe, you're like, President is the commander in chief. I am ready to die for my country. Here's my John Hancock. So when you got that call, like, what was going through your mind?
A lot. And I confronted that in my own head, because I feel like that's why they come after. Maybe the come after isn't the right word, but they target teenagers because at 17, 18, 19 years old, you haven't lived life yet. You don't really know a whole lot about yourself. You're still trying to figure out what you're doing with your life.
Yeah.
And you could still be very impressionable, just like the credit card companies sit on college campuses to get you your first credit card. And, you can have this line of credit, and you don't know responsibility of credit and finances yet.
Yep,
The thing is with life. And especially not during wartime. If I could be saying this after we had gone into Baghdad, it would be a completely different thing. And I wouldn't even be talking like this. Like, I wouldn't even feel myself having the right to think like this. So when I got that call, like, I can't even explain, like, what happened in my head and what happened to me. But I knew in that moment, I was not ready to take another human life. Especially because I personally, and it took me 20 years to admit it, but now I didn't believe in what was happening. And if I may, and not to get political, but any of us around at that time and on that day who were old enough to remember, we were told it happened by a certain individual or group of individuals who came from a completely different country, not from the country we bombed. So I really had a hard time at that moment justifying myself, putting myself in a position now where I'm going to possibly lose my life. It's either lose my life for my country or make somebody else die for theirs. Absolutely. And I couldn't, I had a hard time with that.
So what did you do?
So, and I started, I knew I couldn't go AWOL. I knew I had to watch what I was saying and watch how I was feeling outwardly.
Yep.
And I think with all of that, I started getting sick with my throat, really like constant upper respiratory. And it was always in my throat. Like I would always have throat infections at that point. So much it manifested into my tonsil, my left tonsil, and it caused it to get to the size of 4 centimeters. So it was blocking off the entire back of my throat, and it was ulcerated. So like drinking water was excruciating for me. I couldn't talk. And that's when all the symptoms happened. So I think it manifested itself, stress, the mind body soul connection, everybody. Like I'm living proof to tell you it is such a real thing. And
Yeah.
what stress can do to you is amazing. And our brains are so much more powerful than what we realize, what we give them credit for.
Yep.
Because I was facing this, and what was I like? I didn't know what to do. And I think all of this just manifested. And literally from the time my symptoms started end of August. It was the weekend of Hurricane Katrina. I'll never forget that.
Oh, I remember that vividly too.
Yeah, and it started there. So by October of that year, so 2 months later, I was having my tonsils removed, and I was really, really sick. And that's when I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Oh shit, that's wild.
Yeah.
So, how long were you in treatment? How long did you overcome it? How did you get past this? Because that's, I mean, any type of cancer diagnosis is just not fucking enjoyable. You know what I mean? Like, you know, like what were your next steps? What were your next steps with the military? Let's start there.
So, I still speak to I still call him Top. He's gonna always be my first sergeant, even though he's retired and out. So they always treated me like a little sister because it was mostly a guy unit. It was a man unit. We were truck drivers. I drove huge trucks. They had a big sign-on bonus. It was nice and whatever. So they always treated me like he treated me like a daughter. He was like my second dad. So when I told them, they obviously I stopped drilling on the weekends, and they did a medical board for me. I got medically boarded out. I was already at my almost at my 6 years of service, because the National Guard is 6x2. So you do 6 years active service and 2 years inactive. Reserve. So if something happens nationally or internationally, they could still pull you in those 2 years. So they did my medical board, and I got honorably discharged. At the time, I was actually engaged. And the man I was engaged to was from my unit, and he was a second lieutenant. Well, actually, he was a first lieutenant at that point. Okay. Who never saw combat, and he was in since like around Desert Storm. So to back up, like when I was diagnosed, then because non-Hodgkin's is a very fast-moving cancer. It's very aggressive. So when I met with my oncology team, I had to go for a ton of testing. So I had to go for PET scans, CAT scans, blood work, and then I had to have a bone marrow biopsy done, which was probably the most painful thing. And I've given birth, and that was definitely the most painful thing I've ever had happen in my life. It all happened like within a 2-week frame. So once they had the pathology back and the bone marrow biopsy results and everything, that it was not in my bone marrow, stage 1, thankfully. I began chemotherapy. It was R-CHOP chemotherapy. Okay. So I would go once every 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. I was supposed to have 4 rounds. Right. After my first chemo treatment, 4 days after that, my ex-fiance decided over a voicemail to tell me that I was not his responsibility, that I was my parents' responsibility.
You know what's weird about that? Not to cut you off, I heard, and I've seen and heard that when people come into medical crisis, right? Mm-hmm. Whether, I don't know, cancer, some major like crazy car accident, they can't walk. I always think it's fucked up that the people that they're with, whether that's a partner or a spouse, like in that moment, that's the moment they decide mm-hmm. it's not for better or for worse, and it ain't my problem. And That shit's terrible, bro.
Yeah, it sucked. It was really bad. When I played it for my dad, because like I was staying with my parents up in Northeast PA at that time,
Mhm.
because they were running me back and forth to the treatments.
Yeah.
Um, my dad, I never saw somebody. I was still in the car when I played him the voicemail.
Yeah.
And before, like, I just remember like the car being flown into park. And my father, I think, I mean, he was like lightning. And
Hmm.
before I knew it, he was on the phone with the guys from my unit. And my ex was forced to resign his commissioned officer status at that point. They took it
Oh,
away from him because my father and the guys in my unit, their biggest thing was, this is supposed to be, this is not becoming of a military officer. This is not how you treat people. So if you're treating somebody like this in your personal life, what are they going to do with the men and women that they are commanding?
yeah.
So he got his.
Uh,
He got
well,
his.
so
So,
how
but
did
then
you come
I completed the chemo. I responded very quickly to it. So I only needed 3 rounds of chemo, not 4. But
Mm-hmm.
then I also needed to follow it up with head and neck radiation. So I went through a month of that after the chemo.
Okay. So let's spin it because I want to get to some other things before we run out of time. So I'm gonna ask you this: what was your biggest takeaway? What was your life takeaway in terms of your ability to overcome obstacles? Because that shit is hard. Like, what did you do? What things did you do so you didn't fall and let that be like the end of who you were, or let that destroy you or change you as a person? Because clearly you come out of it and now you're in a better place. So what helped you get to the better place?
So I don't like to throw religion down at people's throats because
No,
I
you
don't
can
like
stop.
that. And I'm not the biggest believer in organized religion, but I do personally know I believe in God, and I believe it was a divine intervention in my life because I feel as though my life could have headed down a completely different path if those things didn't happen, and I don't believe it would have been a positive path.
Right.
So I do believe that I was becoming, whether I realized it or not at the time, a newer version of myself, and I
Yeah.
learned the strength that I have, and with my relationship with God and the faith that I have, um, I just saw life differently, and I started living life. I started um, thinking to myself, something, life is so short. And I was only 24 and 25 at the time.
Mm,
Um, I want to do things like I don't want to look back. I faced my mortality already once and know what that's like. I don't want to look back when it's that time again, and there is no going back, and it's just that time. Like there's opportunities I could have taken and I didn't because of fear. Like that's how I started living my life. Like I'm not going to not do this because I have a fear. I'm going to do it, and I'm not going to live with regret.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
my
Go ahead.
thing.
I think that one of the things I always try to tell people is that like we really one, I'll say this, when it comes to religion, you know, your faith in God or who, and I don't care who you worship, who you believe, your faith in God, something about faith is so powerful, right? Something
Absolutely.
about faith is, it, and I think faith is at its best in people when you really have no options and nowhere to turn because there's nothing else you can do.
Right.
Like there's nothing you can do but try to be positive, move forward, and surrender. Right. So I think there's something to be said for the power of faith and belief, and clearly I believe in God as well, and I think that everything always happens for a reason and in His timing. So
Correct.
I'm glad you like came out the other side. So if you could leave people with like, what would be the one thing that you would tell people that they should apply to their life when they feel like they have nothing else to give, when they feel like their back is against the wall. So the title of the podcast is the Do Work Podcast. What can they do when they feel like they want to quit and
Give
they want to
give yourself grace and believe in yourself. Trust your intuition. Trust that we are given this gut instinct and this little voice in our head for a reason, and we have to learn to trust ourselves. Know that we are so much stronger than we even give ourselves credit for, and have grace with ourselves.
Yo, yeah, I agree with you. I will say I don't think I give myself enough grace ever. But
Right. I learned. I had to learn.
I
Even still, at 40, almost 43 years old, I mean, we learn every day, and there's challenges like at work and in life, and I have to stop and remember where I was, what I overcame, how I got through it, and
yeah,
continue to try to apply that to the ever-changing world and day we are in.
no, I agree. I definitely don't give myself enough grace. I do, just not enough. So you just made me realize I need to like be a little better about that.
Yeah,
So I want to say this before we close out. Your experience in the military, I think, is super important. Like I told you, I'm a military person, very supportive of the military, and I think this is an important question to ask. If given the opportunity to go back, would you do it again?
I would. I don't even have to think about that. I would have. I would. I don't have regret. I would still do it because the experience was amazing from the beginning. The people that I met in basic training in AIT, I'm still in contact with till this day, and we're talking. It's over 20 years later.
Yeah.
The people from my National Guard unit, I still have relationships with. My son and myself just met up with my first sergeant on Labor Day weekend for the first time in 20 years. It's been since I've actually seen him in person. And we had lunch with him, and we were on Fort Indiantown Gap's base. He took us all around. That was my first
Uh,
time back there since then. And just, it was the most amazing feeling. So no, I wouldn't change a thing.
I've been to Fort Indiantown. Yeah, I've actually
Yeah,
been up there twice, 2 or 3 times. I was up there. I used to work with this program that helped underserved youth in the
nice.
community, and for a week they would take them up there. They would have all these like elite CrossFitters come out. I would come out sometimes and give them like inspirational talks, and they would live on the base for a week.
That's awesome though.
It was cool. Like I never like stay, and I would go up and stay with them. Like
Yeah.
I wouldn't stay the whole week because I usually had to work, but I would go up and stay a few days with those guys and girls, and it was definitely an amazing experience. I really enjoyed being up on the base. So. But
Yeah, well, the barracks definitely changed because when we were there, when he was taking us through, I was like, wait a minute, because when we had to stay there in the summer, there was no air conditioning, there was no heat. Now
yeah,
they have like central air and heat. I was like, well, wow,
but they still look old though. Like, and I
they
didn't
are.
even stay where like
Yeah,
the kids stay. You know what I mean? Like where I went to where the kids was, I was like, oh shit, y'all
yeah,
really up in here. And I'm
yeah.
going up.
They're tried and true. They're very old. They are very old.
They're like, I remember I went up and the team that had me come up, the organization used to be called Steve's Club. Now I think it's called for the Forging Youth Fitness Program or something like that. But when I remember getting the email, they was like, you might want to bring a blanket and a good pillow. And I was like, okay. And then I got up there, I was like, and now I see why. All right, cool.
Yeah,
So, no, it was an awesome time. So, Tiff, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share your story. And hopefully, the whole purpose of the Do Work podcast, one is for people to always be inspired. Two, like, me, I'm big on free thinking. Think for yourself, do what works for you. And three, hopefully they can always take something away that's going to make them better or give them just the energy to keep going. So I just want to thank you for coming on today. I appreciate you. And let's do it again. Let's check back in.
yeah, I definitely will. Thank you so much, Diva, for having me. It's so important to me, and I would love to. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. I'm going to close this out and I'm going to get back. All right, guys, I want to thank you again for tuning into the Do Work Podcast. The Do Work Podcast is a weekly podcast where we discuss all things mindset, motivation, entrepreneurship, and you know what my big thing is? Free thinking and how to live your best life possible. Make sure to subscribe. Go over to divarichards.com. Also, follow me on Instagram, Diva Richards on Instagram, and subscribe to my broadcast channel because that's where you guys will get the newest episodes first before I even drop them. All right, fam. Have an amazing day.